everyone. Welcome to this episode of Compliance Deconstructed. We've got Jessica Zeff from Simply Compliance and Lorie Davis as our hosts today, along with Joe Wynn, the CEO and founder of Seiso, information security company. And Joe is going to tell us a little bit more about his company since I flubbed a little bit. That's Joe's word, by the way, flub. But Joe, welcome to the show. You're going to help us talk about information security today. Can you introduce yourself and Seiso?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm a longtime listener. I've been on or listened to every episode. Love the show.
Aww.
Yeah, I'm Joe Wynn. I've grown up in IT and made my way into information security many years ago. Eventually becoming the CISO at several billion-dollar organizations before I started a company. And our company is called CISO, spelled a little bit differently than CISO, like a Chief Information Security Officer. We did a play on words. And at CISO, we help companies get audit ready and with our managed service, stay audit ready for things like ISO 27001, SOC 2, CMMC, not being on this show, HIPAA, I should say HIPAA, among other security requirements. And again, I appreciate being here.
Thank you for joining us. Just so our listeners know, Lorie and I have known Joe for a really long time. And one of many reasons that we continue to work specifically with Joe and his team at Seiso is that Joe, first of all, he understands HIPAA. He has experience in that space. Not all information security organizations do understand HIPAA. And if you work in healthcare compliance, it's not enough just to understand information security. You do need to know your way around HIPAA. So that's an important skill set that I know Joe and his team understand and they can offer and they can support. The other bit is actually Joe and his team, they deliver what they say they're going to deliver, and they're very honest. And that's one of the reasons, Joe, I've told you this before, you get embarrassed every time, but it's genuinely the truth. It's one of the reasons I really wanted Joe on this podcast because he knows what he's talking about. He's honest about it. And he has experience of tailoring information security and adapting it across different organizational needs. So with that in mind, let's get started, Joe. So for our listeners, let's first clarify, why is information security so important nowadays? What's going on?
Yeah, I love that question. Information security, it's no longer like an IT issue. Years ago, it used to be like buried in IT, but really it's operational, it's financial, it's legal, it's all about reputation risk and all of that all at once. If you think about it, every organization is now a technology organization, whether they plan to be or not. And the thing I love about like compliance is information security tells you what you need to do in order to be secure. And compliance is being able to prove it. And that's the part I love, the intersection of those two things.
I take your point, and this is what I say to my clients. It really doesn't matter anymore in this day and age, whether it's not about HIPAA. HIPAA isn't the driving force anymore. It's the fact that we all have data to protect, whether it's, company information, corporate information, information about our industry, whatever it is, whatever data that we have, whatever information that we hold, whether they're designs or their IP, like whatever it is, we want to protect it. Whether and our bank account details, we want to protect all of that. So for our listeners, you're going to hear this from me always. Today, it's not anymore just about HIPAA. So when we think about information security, yes, we've got to consider information security around HIPAA. I get it. But as a business, as an organization, information security is a big risk. So with that said, Joe, what's the starting point for information security? Like, where do you begin to understand what's going on within your organization?
Well, first, one of the things you said, you're right. It's more than just like HIPAA. It's all the things that you were talking about. Customers expect it, regulators expect it, and when you want to get started, it's more than just buying a bunch of tools. It's not just tools. It starts with understanding risk, aligning the responsibilities of people in the organization to how their job helps manage those risks, putting the right controls in place, and then be able to improve that over time. Nobody starts off with a perfect security program, but they got to get started somewhere. And one of the measures that I love about some of the security frameworks that allows you to get started and then continuously improve. Like that's the tenet of ISO 27001. It's a management system for information security, and you can put that framework in place at a very small to a very large organization. So it's think about it. It's like if you know about ISO 9000, it's all about quality. Information security management system is all about having your cybersecurity program run like a quality system, and it's a system for how you manage it. It's about more about process, not about a product you buy.
Hmm. So let's go back to the word you use, risk. That's a pretty big word, and not everyone fully appreciates that word. Now, HIPAA requires covered entities, so healthcare providers, health insurance companies, anyone who's governed by HIPAA, to have a security risk assessment. It's one of the first things the Office for Civil Rights will ask for if you're being audited or if you've had a breach. And they will say, first thing, okay, where is your information security risk assessment? We want to see that. And so many of the organizations I work with don't have that in place. They don't even have that baseline. So, Joe, what is the process to do an information security assessment? Like, how do you get started if you've never done one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason I think it's important is it helps you stop guessing. A lot of companies aren't really sure where to focus, and so the reason it's important. I'll start there, and then I'll talk about how you might get into it, and then what our experience is with HIPAA. But it shows what actually matters and where you're exposed. A lot of companies will spend a lot of money working on the wrong problems, but and if they do that, they might even miss their biggest risks. And you're right; it's expected under many regulations like HIPAA. So HIPAA, I think it calls it a risk analysis, if I recall correctly. And a lot of people read that and they're like, "Yeah, but what's a risk analysis? I need a risk assessment." I thought, well, it's the same thing. HIPAA just HHS OCR, the documentation calls it a risk analysis, but really they're looking for you to take what are all your assets? What are all the things you have in your company that could be affected by a problem? And out of those things, then what are the threats? What could threaten that? And what vulnerabilities do you have? And so when you do a risk assessment, you're going to look at your assets, for example, like a laptop, and you might say, well, what's a threat? Well, a threat is it could be stolen. A threat is it could, you could drop it and it could break. And what could you be vulnerable to? And this is like a really old school, simple example. You could be vulnerable to not having it backed up. And so now your lack of backup on a damaged device where all your data was locally on that hard drive creates a risk for data loss. Or even worse, if somebody steals your laptop and it's not backed up or it's not encrypted, so you can be vulnerable to not having those controls in place, and now you are at risk of either data loss or worse, a data breach. And so as you take all of your assets and you think, well, what's the chances that I might lose the laptop? What's the impact if I lose it? Or what's the chances if somebody steals it? Or what's the chances of it breaking and I lose all that data? That helps you understand your the probability of something going wrong, and then what's the impact if that happens, and then you can start to grade it and prioritize those things. So at that point, now if you do that for all the assets in your organization, you end up with a pretty good list of, well, what could go wrong and what am I vulnerable to? And now I have a prioritized list. Let's put those in order of the largest risks and then start dealing with the most important ones first. So that's how you might do that. And if you do it that way, you're going to meet the intent of what HHS OCR is saying, But as well, you're going to meet the intent of almost every security framework out there, because that's exactly how we do it for an organization that needs ISO 27001 as well. And so the last thought on that is, whenever you're going to look at putting a new security program in place, I always like to get started with thinking about, well, who cares about your security? Those are your interested parties, those are your stakeholders. And then what's the scope they care about? You might have a very large organization with a marketing department that is just putting public information out there. And maybe there's very little risk of you exposing personal information that way, although there could be if we get to the topic you mentioned later. And it may be that you just can't afford to secure that marketing part, as well as you're going to the parts of your organization that store PHI or whatever
Mhm.
PII you might have, protected health information or personally identifiable information. And so you start with your stakeholders, what do they care about, the scope they care about, and then you do a risk assessment around all the assets in that scope. And that helps you get to a point where now you have something to prioritize. And then you can start working on putting your security program in place. That means getting your policies in order, getting your standards in order, making sure you have processes for people to follow that generate evidence. And that's where the compliance part comes in. If there's evidence of it happening, now you can start to prove that you're compliant with that. I'm going to pause there.
I was going to say only that would it be right to say, if we distilled it, if we simplified this process to its barest bones, it's a risk assessment or a risk review is the process of looking around your organization and saying, okay, where might we possibly, how could we possibly have a data breach? Right.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
And if you're not sure, getting some help, getting a professional to look around and say, like, I know I'm very strong on the privacy and breach reporting side of HIPAA, but the technical penetration testing or some encryption or dual factor authentication, I know as much as any other user would do, but I can ask whether that's in place, but I can't implement it. And a lot of people might not even know those terms. So they might not even recognize that there are aspects of information security they might not recognize and need help with. So the bottom line is having a look around, understanding what information your organization uses or holds or sees, and also saying, okay, well, how might the wrong party get a hold of this data? That's the very basics of a risk assessment. That's the
And
first step.
And I would say it even goes a little bit deeper than that. Well, one of the things you said was, well, maybe have multi-factor authentication turned on. And maybe from a compliance standpoint, somebody can point at it and say, yeah, it's right here. There's a configuration. But if you don't take a technical deep dive and take a look and see if it's applying to all the things it should apply to, you might get a false sense of security. And so it's more than just checking the box, but it's actually diving in and seeing if it's turned on for everybody, if it's turned on for all the systems, not just one system. And so it's really about seeing, is it in place? Does the company even know what they should be doing? But then is it done right?
And I would agree about that. And I'm thinking, I guess part of the reason that I said what I said about distilling it and simplifying it is I was thinking about very small organizations who often tell me, well, I can't really afford a big fancy security program. And I think about myself. I mean, I'm only a tiny outfit, Joe. I'm smaller than CISO. I'm tiny. And yet I've found ways of making sure that I'm HIPAA compliant without breaking the bank. Like, I can't afford it. And even though I'm in this space, I'm a professional in the HIPAA information security space, like, I'm on a tight budget too. So I'm really conscious of that when I deal with my clients. Is there any reason, Joe, that even like a small provider, a small organization, or one on a very tight budget couldn't have a reasonable information security program?
Yeah, I think everybody can do it. You don't have to have a massive budget in order to make it work. You really just need to master the fundamentals. And if you focus on that, it goes a long way. I think you named a few of these, but if I'm thinking about it, if you get these top five things right, you're probably heading in the right direction. I would say number one, multi-factor authentication. That one's getting pretty easy to do these days. Lots of systems have the ability just to turn it on, and you can use your phone as a second factor. And to back up for anybody who doesn't know what multi-factor authentication is, it's two different forms to prove who you are. And sometimes you'll get enter your username and password. Well, that's one form of authentication. And then you'll get somebody that says, oh, here's your challenge question, enter this other word in. And they think that's two-factor authentication, but really it's not. It's just a second factor of the same type. It's also something you know. And the multi-factor is it's something you know plus something you have or something you are. And so when you're using your iPhone and it uses the facial recognition and that turns on, now it's using something you are in order to authenticate. And so the combination of you having your phone, that's something you have, plus your face becomes two-factor authentication whenever you're logging into your own iPhone. And so that's a real simple way to think about it.
It drives me crazy. I know the reason for it, but lately it's everything is dual factor authentication and I'm dying. But you guys, just to give a concrete example, most of us have access our bank accounts online. I suspect most of us do. Think about what happens. You put in your username and password, you get a little message that says, hey, we're going to send a code to your email or to your text. And then enter this. That's dual factor authentication working. That's an example of what that looks like. Sorry, Joe.
No, that's good. And one of the things that a lot of websites are starting to do, they're starting to do this thing called passcodes. So if you start to think about, if you look for the passcode setting, what it does is you might get a QR code on your computer screen that you can scan with your phone, and your phone can have something called a passcode. And what that does is no longer are passwords flowing across the network, but more of a cryptographic number will flow across to prove who you are. And it makes that whole two-factor authentication part so much easier once passcodes. You ever try to log into like Apple and all of a sudden your phone pops up and you don't have to put in your Apple username and password anymore. Your phone pops up and it just says, click here to continue logging in, and it scans your face because it already knows the credentials in the background. So it makes it super easy. So there's getting easier.
Any guess as to what kind of phone Joe has?
Yeah, it's either Apple or Android, right? That's the majority.
I vote for Android. Sorry, guys. I have to balance out mentioning Apple.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and you can do all the same stuff with both. They're pretty easy. It's just my experience.
I'm just teasing. But all right. So one important criteria is to look at dual factor authentication. So that's something easy to implement even for a small organization. Yeah. So what's the rest?
The last four are strong backups, patching, limiting access, and then ensuring you have the right security awareness training for everybody. And if you do those 5 things, you're really going to be a long way towards having a more robust cybersecurity program, even in a small organization. So, strong backup. Let's talk about each one for a minute. Strong backups. That just makes think of that risk I talked about earlier, where you might lose your laptop. Well, if you start using Google or Microsoft or tools like that, Dropbox, something like that, and you keep all your data there, now what's happening is it's replicating to those sources or to those places in the cloud, and it's no longer only on your end laptop. So you start to mitigate that risk of losing it. Patching, that's another easy one to do. How many see the little update in the bottom of your Windows computer that says got to restart, patches have been applied, you need to restart to make it happen, and then you sit there with it for like a week? You're putting yourself at risk. It's so easy just to say, you know what, I just got to close all these windows, all these browser tabs. I know how to open them all again, but I just need to reboot so I can get that latest security working based on the patching that comes out from Apple or Microsoft, whoever.
Joe, what's patching? Because I remember a time when someone said patching to me and I was like, excuse me?
Oh, yeah. So Microsoft security updates is another way to think about it. Security updates, a security fix, even if you're using like the Chrome browser and you see in the upper right-hand corner, it'll say update, restart the update or something like that. It's really important you do because that's a fix that came from the vendor, whether it be Microsoft or Google or whoever's tools you're using. And if you don't apply that fix, you're going to be running on the outdated version of stuff. And what happens is, as soon as there's a fix available, bad guys are out there figuring out how to take advantage of those vulnerabilities that they fixed. And they're going to start sending you phishing attacks with links that trick you into going somewhere. And sometimes you can just click a link, and that's all that you need to do. Or you can just open a document, and that's all you need to do. And then something malicious can run in the background. So it's very important to patch. An easy thing to do, and easy for any size organization.
And one of the biggest breaches I've ever had to help manage involved a vendor for the organization I was working for who didn't apply a patch that had been released 10 years before. Their patch management system was not in place. And that resulted in one of the biggest breaches we had ever seen. So it
Yeah,
is a very real issue and easy. It's an easy fix. Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
the next one was limiting access. So what does that mean? It means that make sure that everybody in the company, even a small organization, doesn't have access to everything. Or do they really need to have admin on their laptop in order to work? And and the more you can limit access, the better off you'll be. And so that's just an easy one. Grant the permissions necessary to people to do their job and no more. And then what I think is the most important one, because people turn out to be your weakest link, and how else are they going to know what to do with multi-factor authentication or backups or applying the updates or limiting access at security awareness training? It's a little bit of what we're doing right now. And show this to your teams and let them know the importance of all these things, because getting that person who could be the weakest link, up to speed with what they need to think about, what it means to protect personal information, what it means to protect private information and privacy, goes a long way. And those are all simple things you don't need to be a robust, multi-billion-dollar organization to do.
So we say weakest link with a little bit of care. It's not a personal issue, it's specific to information security and how we talk about information security and protecting data. But your weakest link might just have a bit of a blip on a bad day, but otherwise be amazing for the
Right. I
organization.
mean,
Just
people make
putting that out
mistakes. They're
there.
people,
Yeah.
and and it's okay. But they'll make the probability of them making that mistake, if you explain it to them and get them to understand the impact to the organization, goes a long way. And then that's and these are all great for small companies. And as you grow, then what do you do? That's where you're probably not big enough to hire a dedicated full-time internal IT resource. And that's where getting companies like a managed service provider that can manage. So if you have a half dozen, a dozen users in your company, and you just don't have time and you're not confident everybody's going to maintain their laptops and all their software in the same way, you can have hire a managed service provider, an MSP they call it, and you can get that kind of protection, that kind of extra help for way less than the cost of a full IT resource. And then as you grow a little bit more, you can bring in companies like mine who will help to provide the second line of defense from a securities program standpoint, which is that oversight. Is everybody else doing what they're supposed to be doing, and how do you know? That's what a lot of what my team does with a lot of our customers is we become their second line of defense, their GRC team, their governance risk compliance team. That means, and to help manage the security program. So as you start to grow, you can evolve in the ways that you're protecting your stuff, your company.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. I think that's certainly helpful for our smaller organizations who come to me and say, we can't possibly. So, just switching direction just a little bit, Joe, something that I've seen and you and I have talked about before is I get a lot of clients who'll say, I'm SOC certified. I'm HIPAA compliant. It's all sorts of good. And I'm like nail biting. I remember, a long time ago when I emailed you and said, Joe, is this right? Like, I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't think. And you're like, no, you're right. SOC 2, SOC certification does not equal HIPAA compliance. Can you, first of all, talk us through the different kinds of SOC certifications, what they are, and why aren't they? What are they saying, and why do they not necessarily demonstrate HIPAA compliance? What's going on?
Yeah, so there's many aspects to that question. And even stepping back a little bit, there's things called attestations, which are not certifications. And people will come and, like you said, will say, oh, I'm HIPAA certified. Well, we all know, we on this podcast know, there's no official HIPAA certification, but you can have somebody come along and take a look at your program and make their own attestation, which is an opinion that your program is operating. And so, and I'll touch on a variety of things here, and we can talk about even where SOC 2 comes in, where
Yeah.
NIST CSF comes in. High trust is actually a certification, and we can talk about that as well. And it's a highly structured, certifiable security framework that's often used in healthcare. A lot of hospitals demand that of their business associates, and it combines things like HIPAA, NIST cybersecurity framework, ISO 27001, amongst many other regulations. But back to your point, SOC 2. Let's talk about that. SOC 2, SOC, SOC, the number 2, it stands for System and Organization Controls. And it's audited by a CPA firm because there's something called the AICPA, which is the kind of governing body for CPAs. So if you want to get a SOC 2 report of their attestation, meaning their opinion of how well your security program is running, only CPAs can do it. So that's the first thing.
A CPA is an accounting firm, isn't it?
It is.
Okay.
And the CPA governing body, they govern things like how accountants manage your finances. They also created a standard for how well, like something called a SOC 1 is an attestation or opinion on how well you manage your finances. A SOC 2 is more about how well you manage your security program. And so I'll kind of compare and contrast. SOC 2 is a report about controls, where HIPAA, it's a law about specific requirements that you have to do. Having a SOC 2 report, it doesn't make you HIPAA compliant, but it can help, but they're not interchangeable. So think about HIPAA rules are like enhancements to your controls, where a SOC 2 is an audit report that says, hey, this company has a control environment in place and it's operating as described. So it's all about the design of your security. Then they come and test it to see if it's actually working the way that is expected. So HIPAA is more like a rule book. A SOC 2 is an auditor's assessment of whether your control system works. And they're solving different problems. I'd say people confuse them a lot because they both include policies, controls, audits. They both talk about security and privacy. A vendor might say, hey, we have a SOC 2 because they want you to trust them. Or you can have a SOC 2 report and you can still fail managing your HIPAA controls, because a SOC 2, just in general, it doesn't require you to address HIPAA specific requirements. So, for example, SOC 2 doesn't care if you have a HIPAA risk analysis. It doesn't care if you have business associate agreements. There's a lot of HIPAA specific documents that are expected by HHS OCR, but normally a SOC 2 won't look at that. And a SOC 2 may not look at the privacy rule requirements the same way that HIPAA has for it. So while SOC 2 can be a strong foundation, it doesn't finish the job of HIPAA. But there is something important to know, is there's something called a SOC 2 plus HIPAA. And if your CPA who is doing this is qualified, knowledgeable on HIPAA, that means the auditor can perform their standard SOC 2 audit and they can add additional control criteria that's mapped to the HIPAA requirements. So it still looks like a SOC 2 report, but the testing of the controls specifically reviews the controls that are tied to HIPAA safeguards. And again, that
But
doesn't make you HIPAA certified, because there is no, you heard it here first and last, right? There is no HIPAA certification.
I asked him to specifically make sure we covered that because I've had a lot of clients or prospective clients call me and say, we'd like to be HIPAA certified. And again, just because I thought maybe I was losing my mind, it was one of those moments where I thought to myself, now I'm certain there's no such thing as a HIPAA certification, but I got right back on messaging and was like, Joe, stupid question. And I'm sure I know the answer, but there really is no HIPAA certification, is there? I'm not being gaslit or anything. I'm right. And
No,
Joe was
you're
like,
right. Now,
yeah.
it doesn't mean, we should talk a minute about what does it mean to be certified. That means there's some organization like ISO 27001 or High Trust. They have these top level organizations where people across the world agree what it means, and then they hold auditors accountable to being able to audit to the level that they say, and everybody agrees that the audit's going to be conducted in a certain way. And now they can put their stamp of approval on it and call it certified. But at the same time, the three of us could create the Compliance Deconstructed HIPAA certification if we want. It's only as strong as anybody trusts us to write a certification, but we could give them print them out a certificate using Microsoft Word that says HIPAA certified, and they can hand it out to as many people as they want. And so long the people they give it to actually care that the three of us said it's done right, well, then it has all the credibility it could have based on people's trust in us. So people trust, high trust. People trust the governing bodies for ISO, and so a certification from them holds weight. But they don't know who we are globally, so it may not hold the same weight if we said, "Oh, we certify you as HIPAA," because nobody has, kind of made that a global standard.
Well, but also I'd say that, you have to understand what certification means. Certification does not mean that you will not have a breach. That is not what it means. It does not mean that you have insulated yourself from any kind of HIPAA violation. That's just not the way it works. Any certification, whether it's high trust or an ISO, it really looks at your controls at a moment in time and how they're working, right? And it can include HIPAA, and that's fine. But the people that call me are looking for a certification that will suggest they can't possibly have a breach. That is just not how it works. You can have controls in place, but if somebody makes a mistake, or if you have a particularly, vigilant bad actor that finds a way of getting into your systems. I mean, things happen, and there's so much about HIPAA, just like any other regulation, that is about people and people's actions and the consequences of people's actions. That it's not just a system where you can say, yeah, we have an IT system and we can make sure that it's completely locked down. Well, we can't lock down people in that same way. And if you did, then you couldn't exist as a business, right?
Oh,
So when people call
absolutely.
me and say HIPAA certification, and they're expecting to be able to come out and say we're foolproof, we're HIPAA, we're breach proof. That's not possible. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of what any certification will do, let alone whatever they want to call a HIPAA certification. It doesn't exist, but it couldn't necessarily exist anyway in the way that they're thinking.
Yeah, there is no such thing as perfect security. But, and maybe I'll toss this question back to the two of you. In your experience, when HHS OCR comes knocking on the door, have you seen that they give companies maybe a better treatment if they can demonstrate that they went through the effort to do all the expectations? They have policies, They built their policies to control the risk from a risk assessment, and they're basically meeting all the fundamentals, but anybody can be a victim of a security breach. How, in your experience, have you seen regulators treat companies that can demonstrate they've taken the steps versus those who have totally taken no action?
Lorie, have you I mean, I've had some experience with that. Have you?
Yeah, Joe, I'm glad you brought that up. It really comes to two different points, right? In external audit and in Medicaid space or CHIP or even in ACA, that can be required as part of being a managed care entity. But if you have an infraction or you've got a data breach, they look at it, oh, what kind of preventative steps did you take? Did you have the SOC 2? Did you have HIPAA? Did you have high trust? Did you do everything you could have done to prevent this? And that can really matter when it comes to fines and sanctions as well.
And I've seen some situations where a regulatory body or an auditor might say, oh, well, you're high trust certified. I mean, I hate to pick on one accreditation standard, but this has been my experience, however it is. But I have seen auditors and regulators go, oh, you're high trust certified. Okay, like we'll accept that in lieu of auditing your HIPAA program. So
Yeah, that's a
I
really good point.
yeah.
Um, so I think you asked earlier, and I just want to make sure I'm wrapping things up here a little bit more on SOC 2. There's something called a SOC 2 Type 1, and there's a SOC 2 Type 2. And I get a lot of questions on that as well, where just briefly, a SOC 2 Type 1 is really the auditor comes in and looks at your controls and your design. And they could write a report saying that you're designed properly, or they think their opinion is that your design is good. But what they aren't going to look at is any evidence. And so if you're just getting started and you have a customer who says, look, I can't do business with you unless you get a SOC 2, you might say, well, I can go and get a SOC 2 Type 1 report, and I can have that to you in about 2 to 3 months. But I won't be able to have time to get all these controls operating, generating evidence that can be audited in order to be able to get a SOC 2 Type 2, where the SOC 2 Type 2 is actually looking to see if the evidence is being generated over time, the controls are effective over a period of time. I think CPAs expect at least 3 months of a program operating as intended before they can come along and do a SOC 2 Type 2 audit. So they could issue a Type 1 report and charge you a fee to get that, and then come along in another 3 months and issue you a SOC 2 Type 2 after they reviewed the evidence and finished that part of the audit. It'll be more costly, but that cost might be worth it if you have a very large contract on the line and you might not get the business otherwise. And so companies, they're like, hey, I just want to go for a SOC 2 Type 1. I got to get this report out. My customer agreed that they will sign up with us if we say we're going to eventually get the SOC 2 Type 2, but they need to see some progress, and they'll come along and do that.
All right, folks. Lorie's ditching us. She loves her work so much. No, she did have to run. But Joe and I are continuing the conversation. So, Joe, we've talked about, well, we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you. There were things about the SOC 1 and SOC 2 that I didn't even realize, and I didn't appreciate that there could be, a data collection period. That's why, I tell my clients, hey, I'm not the expert on the security side. Like, I know enough to hold a conversation and identify risks, but I'm not the source of knowledge on everything information security, on the technical piece. Something that you and I talked about and that I'd like to cover on the show is talking about cookies, like not because this comes up. This has come up even with you and I working, and what privacy breaches, how they're connected to this thing we call cookies. So, if we start with, first of all, what is a cookie? What on earth am I talking about? Because a lot of my clients, like, they don't know what this is, they don't know what I'm talking about. So, what is it and why is it important in the context of information security?
Yeah, a cookie is really just a little super small file, a piece of data on your web browser that gets stored there by a website so it can remember information about you between visits. So it's really just a way that if you go to Amazon or if you go to somewhere else and you come back to it a couple days later and you're like, how does it still have my information on what I viewed last or what's in my shopping cart or whatever? So sometimes some of that stuff's being stored in a cookie, which is just a very small file in your computer that your web browser pulls down from the website, and the website checks it when you go back to that website.
Okay. So what does that have to do with HIPAA or privacy? What's the risk going on there?
Yeah, and so I like to think about it as the hidden information security issues that are out there, and think about a lot of risk. It lives outside of the traditional security program, and it comes from tools that your company may not that your company may really consider. So, there's been a lot of lawsuits triggered lately around HIPAA, state privacy laws, even wiretap laws that are triggered because of these website tracking scripts or cookies that happen. And now all of a sudden being secure is even more than all the stuff we already talked about, but it means knowing exactly what data your website shares and with who. And so, it happens in ways that organizations didn't even intend, and it might happen because their marketing teams or their outsourced marketing companies are putting things in place. So, what we're seeing, plaintiff lawyers are using the law to sue companies over this, using things like the California Invasion of Privacy Act, CIPA, which is a wiretap law. And something that looks like a simple marketing tool can turn into a legal or security issue. So, what's happening is these tracking tools are on a site and they may send to third parties. And you might see this like Google Analytics or other kinds of Facebook or Meta. They have these various tracking tools that get embedded into websites, and they grab analytical data or personal information like your IP address, device identifiers, the URLs that you visited, form data in some cases. And you may not even realize this is happening, but it becomes a data disclosure issue to these third parties. And so if you are doing that and do not have like a business associate agreement with the third party who is getting data about, so say Jessica, you go to visit a website because you're looking up something on some particular health condition, and it sends the fact that you were to that website, you visited a particular page to a third party like one of the website analytic companies that are tracking it for ad data. You didn't know that you visiting this health provider's website was going to drop that data to, it was none of Google or Facebook or anybody else's business that you wanted to go to that website, but yet now they can correlate that. And from that same computer, maybe you went to Facebook, maybe you went to Google and you were logged in. So now it knows, who you are from your IP address, the information, your computer identifiers. It knows who you are, and now it knows what you're looking at. And that may not be something you're intending. So these tracking cookies, they create privacy and compliance exposures. These third-party scripts, they introduce that security risk, and it could be happening for marketing tools that you may not even review as part of your security program. Earlier, when we got started, I said, maybe the marketing department isn't an area that's processing any personal information. Normally, you wouldn't expect it to be. So you scoped it out of your security program because you can't afford to fix everything to the same level as where PHI is being stored. And so these systems include these data flows that are happening. And I have some notes here on this, like in healthcare and HIPAA tracking tools, they're collecting information tied to individuals and healthcare contacts. So lawyers will argue it's treated as PHI, and sending that to these third parties without a BAA can be seen as impermissible disclosure I think that's a term I learned listening to the podcast over the years here. And you're disclosing it even if you didn't intend to. And so you have state privacy laws like California Consumer Privacy Act, that CPRA. Other state laws are expanding across the U.S. to cover this. And sharing personal data with these third parties, it requires some kind of consent and notice that it's happening so that you can make a decision to stop right away. And then the part that really surprises people, the wiretapping, the eavesdropping laws, that was the California Information Privacy Act, CIPA. And the claims are being made that session replay tools, meaning that somebody can replay the path you took as you went to their website, are intercepting communication between the user and the website without proper consent. And so you have lawyers who are saying, hey, that sounds like I can go after this website owner, this company, because they're doing this. And they may not go any further than a settlement, but they're going after your money because you're taking these actions. And it's a whole lot harder to prove you weren't doing it and to fight it than just to settle. And that seems to be all the rage right now.
But I love this part of our conversation because this issue around cookies has taken so many organizations by surprise. There's a real lack of awareness. I mean, if you're in the information security space and you're dealing with this all day, like me, it's not going to be a surprise. It was, you taught me what I know about cookies and why there's this issue, right? We've come across a couple situations where, you and I have been asked to work on providing support and remediation for exactly this particular case. And so I find this really fascinating. The thing to be aware of, and just kind of summarizing what Joe is saying and really looking at the consequences. I mean, this is, if you can have cookies on your website intentionally or unintentionally, and it's collecting data, right? And users might not know that that's what's happening. But think about maybe emails, and not just in the health space, but think about email advertisements that show up in your email, or suddenly you're getting snail mail and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know, how did they get my information? Like, what's going on here? Why are these so, I shopped somewhere and suddenly I'm getting advertising for all of this shopping. There's a lot of business going on with our data that we haven't consented. So you're doing your thing. Cookies is collecting all this data. Well, it's sharing data and selling data. This is big business. So there's a lot of money being made off of the data that's being collected every time we turn on our laptops, right? Or go into our device or our phone, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of data that's being shared and sold and collected without our consent sometimes, right?
Right.
And that's why you increasingly get these boxes that say, hey, we use cookies. Do you want us to reject cookies? Will you accept some? And we've got, I forget what they call it, essential cookies that you
Yep.
can't opt out of, right? But you get those little boxes you have to tick. But there are some websites, and in my limited experience, certainly with my smaller clients, they don't actually know. They don't know about cookies. They don't know how cookies operates, and they don't appreciate that cookies might be used on their website. And that's where the problem comes in. And when you wind up with a potential breach or an attorney, or you wind up in a settlement, you can't say, I didn't know.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that's the problem. It's not a sufficient answer. I'm
Yeah.
not
And at the core
IT
of it,
savvy.
and the
I
core of
mean,
it, I think, is it's really more of a almost a legal problem to start with, because once you understand what you are signing up for and what your marketing site is doing, and you understand legally what it's doing and where it's sending stuff, then you can start to figure out what you want to control. And then that's where we can come in from a security and compliance standpoint to say, okay, now you understand what you want to do, and it's intersecting between security, legal, and compliance best practices, and you take all three of those things and put it together. That's sometimes what it takes to understand what's happening.
so on that note, I'm going to bring this back to where we started. And we started by talking about the importance of a risk assessment. So, or a risk review, an information security risk review, whatever you want to call it. I call it an information security assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first question I ask when I'm reviewing HIPAA compliance. The first thing out of my mouth, just as if I was the Office for Civil Rights or an auditor, the very first question is, okay, where's your information security risk assessment? So this conversation about cookies and website and marketing, a key aspect of the conversation is to include that in your information security risk assessment and make sure that that document that you're using includes some scrutiny of marketing practices and cookies on your website or websites. Might cookies be found in other places, Joe? I don't know enough. Is it just, could it be on a provider portal? Where do you find cookies?
Yeah, well, any web hosting, if you go to a website, they're almost always using cookies in order to set things on your browser or to remember things about your browser. So while you might be able to go to a website that doesn't have cookies, it's very, and I'm getting a little bit outside of my how websites work expertise, but where they come from, you're taking your web browser, you're going to a website. You can also get a tracking cookie in your email. Somebody can send you an email with like a single pixel, an invisible pixel that is linked through the URL back to a website, and it can track things. But still, something on your computer is accessing the internet. And what are they accessing? A website. And that website is doing something to host what your computer's talking to. And between the two of them talking, that's where the cookie gets set, or something gets pushed, setting a flag into a database on that web server.
Such an innocuous, innocent sounding word, cookie. I think of chocolate chip cookies every time. And really sweet, very cute. And in the meantime, there are such pros and cons and controversy about them. It pains me. I know that's a little side note that tells you how my mind works, but just sharing. Right. Joe, thank you so much for talking about information security, particularly around, the HIPAA healthcare space. We covered a lot of ground. I think it was super helpful to talk about the importance of risk assessment and looking at SOC 2 and how that compares to what that actually demonstrates, and really reminding our listeners, keep in mind, anyone trying to sell you a HIPAA certification, you need to inquire further because that really doesn't exist. So digging about, and I've had to tell people that. They've called me and said, someone's trying to sell me a HIPAA certification. And I've said, yeah, that's not someone you want to work with. But in really digging through cookies and wiretapping, and that really there's good examples in talking about patching and some basic principles that even smaller organizations or not-for-profits can actually put in place to protect their data rather effectively. I think that's a superb conversation to have been able to have. So thank you so much for coming
Oh,
on to the
you're
podcast and
welcome.
sharing your experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. And if you stayed on this long, feel free to, if you have more questions or want to keep talking about this, reach out. Seiso, you can reach us at CISOLLC.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Wynn Joe, and connect with me. Happy to chat more.
And Joe and CISO have their own podcasts, and I have to tell you, very worth listening to. So there's Distilled Security. Is that right?
So Distilled Security is a podcast that's separate from CISO, but there's three of us who own companies. We sit around and we chat about cybersecurity all the time. And about a year and a half ago, we said we should just record this and turn it into a podcast. And it's called Distilled Security because you'll usually find us having a distilled beverage of some sort while we record the podcast. And then at CISO, one of our fantastic folks on our team, Lauren, runs our security podcast called CISO Side Up, where we hit on pressing issues that we find a lot of our customers running into. So Google Distilled Security Podcast, come to our website and find the CISO Side Up podcast, all fantastic.
It is. And I say that I listen regularly, not to those two podcasts, not just because I know Joe and CISO, but because I've learned a lot. And certainly sometimes I'm pushed to my limits of what I actually understand, but that's been a good thing. Listening to those podcasts has pushed my learning and understanding and allowed me to participate in conversations that maybe a few years ago I really would have struggled with. So I recommend, I highly recommend as a learning and development tool to listen and make time for those podcasts. You really will learn a lot and you'll pick up a lot about information security in a very engaging way. So on that note, we're going to love you and leave you. Thank you for listening. Joe, thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.